me to record my audio from my phone?
Um, you can if you want. I don't know what that would do though.
Okay. I think I think it'll probably be okay because I'm in a classroom because
Yeah.
my room is like uninhabitable for audio purposes. So um, I think I'll be okay. I was worried about distractions, but no one's here, so we're good.
Awesome. I'm doing a separate audio recording and a visual Zoom recording. So we'll see how this works. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of I guess research or conspiracy theory watching, like globalism and uh and federal banking, and it's just mind blowing. Have you looked into the Federal Reserve or government bailouts at all?
Yeah, I'm familiar. I didn't do that much research like with globalism,
No,
but
no, it's globalism is just an
yeah, I mean,
idea,
they,
but
they bail out countries that they're favorable of, and
yeah,
and there's a lot of bias.
yeah,
And
it's a small, tiny corporation like the Federal Reserve, and then there's different groups that people get together, and then they just decide who's going to be bailed out, when they're going to
lobbying,
be bailed out. What was that?
it's a lobbying organization.
Yeah, it's
Not a lot
massive
of
lobbying on a world scale. It's
yeah,
scary, dangerous.
so much power.
It's an
That's a scary.
insane amount of power. Yeah, something I was looking into. You know who Alex Jones is?
I do.
Oh my God, he has so many documentaries and just videos that he throws out. I don't know how legit any of them are, but he does present a lot of evidence, like a scary amount of overwhelming amount of evidence, where you do start to question it whether or not you even believe it's true or not. So he was talking about the Federal Reserve and how since its charter in 1912 and since it was passed into like legalization in 1914, that they have just been the dominating force of bailouts, and while bailouts and the dominating force of continuing depressions and recessions in like throughout the world.
Right. I mean, their monetary policies are so impactful. For instance, in 2020, we have the coronavirus pandemic, and their decisions or decisions not their lack of decisions, have a tremendous impact on the economy. So right now they have lower interest rates to, effectively zero, and that has a great stimulating effect on the economy. But in times of crisis, uh, like in 2009 when they had the auto bailout,
Mm.
the the economy could not have been salvaged without their help.
Yeah, they also had the like the housing market crash in 2008. They had the stock market plummet. But
Exactly.
one of the things that was really really weird was that they demanded money from the federal government to essentially give them a blank check so that they could divvy out independent loans to banks who could not fund themselves and who could not
Right.
afford to give individuals loans so that they wouldn't be able to go out into the market and buy anything. Like when you have
Right.
that level of power where you're giving the government money, there's quid pro quos happening left and right behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
It's
And it's quite ironic because the Federal Reserve's two jobs are to, one, like control inflation, and two, secure the public's faith in its banking institutions. So when you
yeah,
have an organization that is so powerful, is constantly, doing questionable banking transactions, like what does that do for its public? Something to consider.
yeah, it is something to consider. They can control whether the public even has money. They can deflate money in a matter of seconds by not bailing out any banks, by not giving government money to pay stimulus checks. They're the ones that give the government the $1 trillion stimulus check that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic. They're the ones in 2008 and 2009 gave gave Obama, what was it, $770 billion.
Bailout.
Yeah, like without the Federal Reserve, America would.
Yeah. And that manipulates, bond prices and treasury yield prices. Like, it's just unbelievable how much power they have in that regard.
And it's weird that it's private citizens. It's not like it's a government entity. It has the name federal in it, but its board members are all across the world. It's, well, not across the world, but they have a very broad range of agendas that they can just manipulate through the government themselves.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah, there were a couple groups in particular. There was like the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, and the Committee for Foreign Relations, where you see a lot of overlap of presidents, like Jimmy Carter. You see like the Clintons. You see prime ministers. You see UK royals. You see a lot of the president, the U.S. Treasury, the head of the Federal Reserve, all on these groups, and they're all influencing world policy, and they're all also influencing American policy by determining how much money America gets. That's a new level of like bondage. They hold America captive. It's a little scary.
And these organizations are internationally focused.
Oh yeah. They want
Federal Reserve is U.S. bank.
Yeah, they want world banks. They want, like, the Federal Reserve is only in America for the time being, but they want to establish, I think David Rockefeller in 1991. So he's on all three of these boards, like the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, Committee for Foreign Relations. He wanted to establish a world banking system where they would stabilize the currency to make it equal across the world, and then have steady levels of interest, have steady interest rates worldwide, so that they can control the market through the whole globally. There's positives to that if you're living in a third world country and your dollar is worth nothing, like in Zimbabwe, where it's like $20 million for milk, and they'll stabilize it. But that comes at a price. They're not just giving you that. Like, you have to give something up for them to give that to you.
Right, and it's so unprecedented for this entity that's not democratically elected or even appointed to just
scary.
seize power over, the economies and fiscal policies of, continents in the world. That's just, never been seen before, and it has the power to be very destructive on a financial scale. They can't possibly coordinate the global economy in an effective way. Not in the world we live in.
Absolutely not, especially when there's no term limits. They're not democratically elected. They have their own agendas in mind, and they'll do whatever they want through whatever means necessary to make sure their wallets do not shrink.
Exactly. And these people are, quite rich or prominent or influential to begin with. They can't be trusted to have the world's interest in mind.
Yeah, when you have
they're not
prime ministers, presidents, generals, heads of banking systems in America, worldwide, and like across the spectrum of the military-industrial complex, to everyone who has a hand in anything globally, and then is also dealing with money on a worldwide scale. It's not going to end up well for the common individual living in any one of those particular countries, because they have no say in what happens.
Exactly. Plus, a lot of these, these banking titans, world leaders, and just general, elites have made their keep, from the blood, sweat, and tears of these people. Like they've rose to prominence through some of them, not all of them, of course, through shady or unethical means.
And there's no way for the public to even know what's said in those meetings at all. Like it's just not it's not known to the public, but
Also
they
very
are
trouble.
giving the public their freedom, so to speak, by allowing them to have money and determining if there's inflation or if the market doesn't crash the next day. Like these people have the power
It's
to
a
make the stock
secret
market
society.
crash. It's
It's a secret
unprecedented.
society. They're not transparent in the slightest bit.
Yeah,
They,
it's absurd.
they despise transparency.
Yeah, that's
They
why
do
it's why it's so secretive. It's
keep cover.
that's why like big tech is very scary for that reason, in my opinion, because it could go two ways. It could go uh, one route where they use big tech to then start exposing the amount of corruption used um, in these pseudo government agencies, or the people that are just controlling these government agencies, or it could be used to silence those trying to expose them. Like Alex Jones
Yeah,
has been like banned from Twitter, banned from all social media, kicked off YouTube, and he does have some sketchy things about Sandy Hook in particular, but he does have a lot of evidence and a lot of knowledge of the Federal Reserve and exactly what we're talking about how it gets very, very murky, very, very murky really quick when you talk about global domination of currency. And they're just silent, like absolutely silent.
yeah. I wouldn't give too much credence to a guy like Alex Jones, who spreads uh, conspiracy theories and other forms of like alternate information very frequently. But his point is still valid.
Exactly.
These
That's my point. It's
must
not about the
must be
person, it's about the point.
Yeah, the point is very valid. These
Yeah.
organizations are up to no good, and they need to be examined by people who are actually legitimate, not
Yeah.
like Alex Jones. Just you
Yes.
know,
Yeah. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, I think a couple of days ago, and there were a couple of ideas that came about where they could then mitigate the amount of corruption and then over time have a new like unveil the amount of secrecy held in these meetings. A couple of those there's never been an audit on the Federal Reserve ever. Like they spend trillions and trillions of dollars and give trillions of dollars to America, and just we don't track any of it at all. If there were audits of that, if there was like a receipt, like you go to Ralph's, I go to anywhere, any supermarket, we pay for something, we get a receipt showing our transaction and exactly what happened. That does not happen with government whatsoever. If there was some receipt or
oversight.
anything, like we would actually be able to track and then have some confidence and faith in those who are dictating how we live our lives.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve is a central bank, and
Yeah.
there's no entity that has the authority, first of all, or even the means to regulate them. I mean, who would you suggest should do it? Like the military?
No, they're too
They're
strong now.
very
They have the monopoly. The only thing that can be done is regulating the power they already have. You can't take the power away because they're too strong. Like it would be economic collapse everywhere. The only thing that
right.
I can think of right now, and I'm not an expert by any means, nowhere near, the only thing I can think of is having these receipts where it shows exactly what they spend their money on. That's it. So that there's a level of transparency between these huge entities and the civilians living there. Because if it was proven that there are high levels of corruption and bailouts and just funneling money into the military industrial complex and starting wars overseas, it would start to rile up a lot of people and cause a lot of chaos. But no one hears about any of this.
Absolutely.
It's
It would be very beneficial for Congress, I would say, to probably have this ability, to create some kind of a committee that makes new laws regarding the requirement for the Federal Reserve to release their transactions, and not only that, does like routine check-ins
I
on
agree.
the state of the Federal Reserve's transactions, because
It just gets tricky because I'm worried that in government there's already so many moles and like there's a huge swamp of corrupt people. Like it's so difficult to navigate your way through and to set up another committee without having corrupt officials working for the Federal Reserve on behalf of the Federal Reserve.
Exactly.
It's like we're not even dealing with multi-billions, we're dealing with multi-trillion dollar entities. It's you can't even comprehend it.
Yeah. The answer to government corruption is not more government corruption.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, creating new oversight committees and bureaucratic festivals is not really going to accomplish much for the uh, ultimate goal we're trying to achieve here.
It's just kind of crazy how there hasn't been government checks up until this point. Like the Federal Reserve found, like the Federal Reserve, the first national central banking set up in 1912. There has not been one single check since. It's 2020. That's 108 years of just nothing, of just
Right.
continuous spending on their own behalf, when they
Right.
want, to who they want, and how they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a conspiracy. I don't know. I don't have the papers or the proof to show it, but it was just how we bail out third world countries. The Federal Reserve bails out third world countries with such high interest rates. And what happens when they default is we demand their natural resources in return so that we can then have monopolies and have complete tyrannical control over those countries that cannot afford to live and exist.
Right. We shouldn't be giving out loans to countries that are very likely to default because it ultimately benefits neither of us.
Well,
You know,
I don't think we should be giving out loans to other countries in general. It's
well, that's a fundamental part of world economics,
yeah.
especially wars. Money just
Well, yeah,
passes across borders and has to funnel around the world.
yeah, that's the
For
issue. It's the same people paying for both sides of the same war.
yeah, when the parties involved are you know special interest groups who are completely coordinating this effort, that changes the equation. But the U.S. has a long history and continues to you know send money across the globe in a circuit.
Yeah,
That's
one way or another, it always comes back, but it always has to make stops through war every single time.
yeah. And I think this relates to influence that can be generated through currency. And when we think about globalism, how did the U.S. become such a prominent figure across the world? And I would argue that it was, not completely, but a very large factor was the rising influence of American goods, particularly from dominant American manufacturing. And those goods, were very valued across the globe. And when America has, such a strong financial backdrop, it is much easier for them to assert their influence in other areas, political, military, and that was, I would argue, a very significant
Yeah,
factor
that
in
that
how
that's
America
actually
got to
really
market.
interesting that you bring that up because we're like amidst a trade war with China right now for manufacturing. Like we're trying
Yeah,
to bring American jobs back. We're trying to, or depending at who you look at, they're trying to lower or raise corporate tax to either take more money from corporations or to bring jobs from corporations to America. What do you think about that?
yeah. I think that the trade war is the culmination of decades of rising Chinese economic influence and power. They have the second largest GDP in the world. We have the first largest GDP in the world, but their manufacturing output, especially their export statistics, are considerably stronger than ours. And the U.S. is feeling threatened by that and is trying to gain some of the power it lost. In the 1970s, before China experienced a a blossoming, I would say, of capitalist uh, economic theory. They were a backwards Eastern nation that the U.S. didn't take seriously, and since they really opened up to Western powers, they were able to extend their influence economically, very considerably, and for that reason, they are now a very powerful geopolitical force, and they're I don't know if this is going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if they eclipse the U.S. in terms of world superhero status, like because they're
I
just
wouldn't either because America,
powerful.
well, they do have we do have a lot of issue with regulations. We are a lot more like we don't have slave manufacturing companies in America. Like in China, they actually had to put nets around the manufacturing companies so people would not jump out, or if they jumped out, they'd survive. Like
Right.
we don't have that here. When you have that, you're able to pay so little and pay that you're able to export at such a higher rate when you're just throwing people away. Like it's modern day slavery. Like in America, we don't have that, and it's a good thing we don't have that. But because other countries don't hold themselves to that higher standard, they could eclipse us.
Yes, that is completely right. I mean, it's a trade-off between workers' rights, not only workers' rights, workers' lives,
Yeah.
workers, just health and safety versus, macroscopic economic gains. And the US is founded on, individualism and, a social contract and inalienable rights. And it would be completely antithetical to our country's values to have such a labor system, but
But
China continues
But we
to grow
do
power
use
like
that
that.
labor system though through China. Like Apple does have manufacturing companies in China, even though they're an American company. They have manufacturers in China. They have them overseas using this modern day slavery to promote themselves. Is there any way in the future you see people holding these massive corporations like Apple, like Google, like all these multi-billion dollar tech companies accountable for their like use of these modern day slave trade?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. To go back a little bit, big tech is under heavy surveillance from Congress over its rising just domination over many aspects of the American economy and also private citizens' lives, like you and me. You know, they're just all around us. They're collecting our data,
Yeah,
looking at what we search. That's a whole nother discussion for another time.
it is. I've completely
You know,
deleted most of my social medias because I just don't want them tracking every single thing I look up. It's too much.
yeah, and there's an acronym for these companies. It's called FANG: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and they're probably the five most powerful companies to ever exist. I would argue.
Yeah,
And
Apple has a net worth of $2 trillion with cash of $200 billion.
yes,
Like two
those five.
hundred billion dollars in reserve, and they're doing nothing. Or I wouldn't say nothing, but they're not taking. I think they should be the ones taking the charge of moving out of China, even though it would completely. I think it might decimate their company because they can't make an iPhone for less than $1 anymore. If they move to America, it's just not going to be a possibility.
Right. Those five companies have, I believe they have influence over like half of the S&P 500. So
Yeah.
if they all go up by 1% and the other companies all go down by also 1%, go down by 1%, the market will be net green for the day. So these countries are undeniably enormously influential. And I think it's only a matter of time before it's already happening that, U.S. antitrust agencies, the Department of Justice, will step in and say this is not okay. And I don't know if it's going to be with regards to them having just so much say in consumers' lives,
Mhm.
or if it's going to come down to their unscrupulous manufacturing tendencies and how they exploit labor in third world countries. And underdeveloped areas of, manufacturing, but the point is that, you know, they can't really grow much larger. And I
Yeah,
believe that
what's
people,
crazy is even while they are exploiting these the manufacturing companies overseas, their products are so expensive. Like the new iPhone was at around $1,000, and they're exploiting this. If they would then move that company to America and have manufacturing in America, they would not be able to produce the same technology because no one would be able to afford it. It just wouldn't be it wouldn't be a possibility. Technical difficulties. We're back. Um, I think it's going to be incredibly interesting to watch over. I think the next. I think it's been in the past 20 years that big tech has really seen this massive boom where they've been able to now take control of people's lives and take their data. And if they so choose, they can sell it to the government. There's nothing prohibiting them from doing that.
yeah, there's nothing prohibiting them.
There's what?
There is nothing prohibiting them.
Yeah, there's nothing prohibiting them. I mean, we do have like while we do have First Amendment rights, the rules and regulations of these massive big tech multimedia companies, it's to their own standards. Unless we now amend the First Amendment and make new, like add in subtext that social media is now a part of it. It is a private corporation, but they have such massive influence on people's lives, even on elections. If Twitter says something about an election, like they have, what was it? They silenced the New York Post. It's a reputable newspaper around for 100 years. Even the fact that they're able to do that is just crazy. They're able to just silence who they want when they want.
Yeah, I have 2 points here. The first is that, in the past, when you had, very powerful monopolies like U.S. Steel, which was the first billion-dollar company ever in the
Yeah.
U.S. in 1912 or 1913, those companies were manufacturing agencies that controlled, prices of goods. But these companies, the 21st century, you know, oligarchies, I would even argue, they can have influence over every aspect of everyone's lives because,
Because it's not
you're so
products that they're
dependent.
selling anymore. It's like we've become the products.
We are the products. They
Yeah.
they target consumers. Like, they want you. That's who they're selling the good to. They're selling it to you.
Exactly.
And
It's no longer buying steel, buying a phone, buying something that's an actual thing. Like
yes,
that's
it's your identity.
yeah,
It's your identity.
it's you. They can buy and sell you.
Yes. That is why there is such a push for these companies to, get user growth because, they're just they're siphoning out our information and our data and they're selling it. And that is the ability to be very, pernicious in the future. And, who knows where all the data is going or what will happen to it. And the second
Well,
point, yeah,
I
what were you
think
gonna say?
I think it was Google that came out last year that said even incognito tabs and incognito searches, they still track and record that, and that really freaked people out. And it freaked me out for a moment, and then I realized why the hell would they not track it? Like what they just tell you it's incognito, and then they don't show you your own search history. But of course they're tracking it.
Exactly. And the jury's still out on the scope of these, you know, these data collections. We know that they're, not necessarily spying on us. We know that they're, looking at our information, but we don't know the extent of that.
Yeah.
And, there are investigations on their way that are just trying to get an accurate, figure on the scope of that. We don't really know how extensive it is, but needless to say, it does, I can say this with quite a fair amount of confidence. It does, encapsulate a very large percentage of our lives, and
Yeah.
we're oblivious to most of it.
I think one of the issues is because it started out as private companies, and it still is private companies. But when they started, no one thought that their scope of influence would be so grand that we would become such viable and sellable products within a matter of years. So I think we have to now start looking at them as public forums and platforms owned by private individuals. If we start looking at it that way, it's just like a newspaper. It's just like speech. Like if I'm texting you on iMessage or on WhatsApp, that's just a platform we're using, but we're using our own voices, even though they're a privately owned company. But when it comes to like Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, it, like right now in 2020, it's murky. Even though it's a platform, they're just seen as private entities, and I think that's where it gets kind of slippery.
It really does. And, today is November 5th. For me, it's November 6th because I'm 10 hours ahead of you.
Yeah.
But, we just had an election, and you can't argue with the amount of influence social media has on elections.
Oh, I think Twitter silenced and took down some videos that the White House press secretary put out. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that was able to be done, that you were able to silence the White House press secretary.
Yeah, I believe in 2016, there were major allegations of foreign countries using social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, to infiltrate, the minds of American voters.
Yeah.
Spreading information. So this year there was a big push, for them to, remedy that. But needless to say, the amount of misinformation, manipulation, and misrepresentation on, these forums is remarkable. And,
Yeah, it's scary because what's happening now is, do you know who, I was watching a video with Tim Pool. He was on Joe Rogan, I think, a year ago, and it was with Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and then the head of their, I forgot what committee, but they define the rules and regulations of the website. And he was basically outing them for having ideologically left-leaning rules when it comes to gender and sex and things of that nature. And he was pointing that as a problem because if you're a public platform and you are ideologically leaning a certain way, in the next coming years, when we come to AI and we come to artificial intelligence, we'll just program them to think a certain way, and they'll just be able to silence anyone who doesn't think like them. No matter what
Right.
that thinking is, it will just be that scary where if you are not part of them, you're against them.
This is very creepy 1984 vibes.
Yes, it's
A discussion.
Orwell ahead of his time, man. Ahead of his
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, they should have called that book 2020.
Serious. What's crazy is it's not even it's bad, but it's gonna get much worse before it gets better.
Right.
Like we're gonna actually have to have hate speech laws written in, and then people will have to be arrested for us to see how bad that really is for free.
Yeah, you're right. And technology has been largely welcomed by the world, as a way to connect the world, to make life more convenient, easier, raise living standards. But when will we realize that there are limits to, the amount of benefits that we can receive from this, revolutionary development, before we see the consequences that, are just inevitably associated with its spread? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it too, because when technology becomes so powerful and its influence so rampant, you can't ignore the data heists, their surveillance states, and all this just remarkable.
I think
remarkable
2016, I think 2016 and 2020, though these election cycles have really opened up the public's eye to the amount of silencing and the amount of influence that big tech and social media has on every single individual who uses them, which is every single person in America and arguably most people in developed countries in the world.
Yeah, and I would argue that, first of all, I believe that the 2020 election is probably the most polarized and politically divided election since Lincoln's time in 1860.
Yeah,
Um,
it's 3 days since the election, and we know not 2 days since the election, we know nothing.
right. And if you look at, the aftermath, not only the aftermath, but the election results, urban areas were as Democratic as ever and rural areas were as Republican as ever. Not necessarily as ever, but it's remarkable how polarized
Yeah,
the split. And I believe that is largely due to, social media algorithms,
yeah, it's you
around with
trap
people
yourself in your own bubble.
data feed. Yeah, exactly. Trapped in your own bubble, as you put it. You're just fed information you want to hear, and you are completely, shielded from any kind of opposition. And that's how Twitter engages its users, really.
Yeah,
And
Twitter is really good at their algorithms too. Like on Twitter, I follow Trump, I follow Biden, I follow everyone that I can politically left and everyone politically right. So my Twitter feed will literally go Biden, Trump, Clinton. It so that I see everything across the spectrum. But if you're not like that, if you hate Trump with a passion, you're not going to follow him at all. And when you start to not follow people you disagree with, you're just going to have confirmation bias over and over and over again. So you're stuck in your little world, and everyone you talk to thinks exactly like you.
exactly. And that makes people impervious to, moderation of their views,
Yeah,
because you think a certain way and they know that, from your, previous, internet activity, your location, your age, they can surmise, who you are and what your interests are, what your identity is. And, they will completely, just like ambush you with your own thinking, and they will
yeah,
just draw a circle around you and say, like, here's what you're going to be fed. And, you can't run a functional democracy when so many citizens just can't even consider the other point of view.
it's not even considerate. They're not even being told what it is.
Yeah.
Like Instagram feeds, they will only show you what you want to look at. They will not show you anything else. Well, that's all social media. I'm just using Instagram as a
Certainly.
specific one. But if you're not being showed what you don't want to look at, it's like you're sleeping. You're not shown anything of any merit whatsoever. You're continuously going down the rabbit hole of just thinking you're right consistently when you've actually probably never been right at all.
Yeah. You have a point there. It's so dangerous when, people think in bubbles and,
How do we get around it? Like, how do we get out of it?
um, I think in general, we need to read news and digest information with skepticism because bias is everywhere. We don't even see it most of the time, but it has a very strong effect on our,
Yeah.
political views.
News stations like CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they are not reliable anymore. None of them are reliable. They are way too. We have to now go back to a time where we're going to independent journalists, and the news is no longer reliable. Like, you can't turn on the TV and expect anything from anyone to be true. Nothing.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
it's
And I
ridiculous.
think much of Trump's popularity in this election, especially, can be attributed to people just being very, turned off by the mainstream media because, it is true that, they do some pretty, some pretty, I wouldn't necessarily say unethical, but they incorporate much of their, bias, perhaps even liberal bias, into not only their reporting, but the facilitation and the distribution of their news.
Yeah. Here was something interesting. So after the Hunter Biden email story broke, whether it was true or not, the amount of national coverage it got was scarcely low. Like 3 days after it broke, MSNBC, CNN, and NBC, it might have been 3 or 2 days, had a total of 4 minutes of allocated airtime. 4 minutes. That's three of the most mainstream news medias, and CNN had all four of those minutes.
Right.
It's even if you don't believe it, or if you don't, you at least have to investigate something before you look at before you make a decision. There was just nothing at all.
Yeah. And studies have shown, through, social experiments and analysis that it is enough for a news media to simply cover an event. So having the news media decide to cover, an event or not cover it will have a very significant effect on, how readers perceive it. It's not only the content of the coverage.
No, it's just the headline. That's it. It's just the headline.
Not even the headlines, but just the fact that they decided to mention it is enough.
That's it.
Because people will think about it.
If I went to CNN or Fox and I just read a headline, and I'm like, if I'm an avid Republican and I'm looking at Fox and I read a headline, I'm like, yep, that's right. That's it. That's all I need. I don't even need to read it. If I'm on the left and I read CNN and it just says something, doesn't matter what it is, that's it. I believe it.
Yeah.
There's no exploring or trying to prove yourself wrong. None. No one wants to prove themselves wrong. They're too scared to do it.
Just in general, human nature dictates that, being wrong, well, it's not really true, but this is how people think, that being wrong is just like a fundamental and, just it's a mistake you can never make because
it's a weakness.
It disproves yourself.
Exactly.
Like how do you get around that? So that is a major, obstacle to begin with. And, these, 21st century, forces are not helping either.
No, they are making this a lot worse, and we're getting to a point where the world doesn't know what to believe, or what they are believing may not be something that they should believe at all.
Right.
And they're just confirming it for themselves over and over and over again, and it's just going to get more and more polarizing until there's a break. Like there's no sewing it back together because people do not want to do it. They do not want to. Like, you're not going to find a Republican that's going to watch CNN to try and prove himself wrong, and you're not going to watch a liberal watch Fox News to try and prove himself wrong. You might find them, but it's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And the pressure's building. People are getting more and more tense and impatient. And I think people kind of lament the partisanship right now. No one wants it, but no one has a solution really.
Yeah.
How do you this very sophisticated labyrinth of partisanship and information spread? You just can't do it. It's so prevalent.
Like there's no checks and balances on media.
There can be.
In government, there's checks and balances. There's different branches to make sure the other one doesn't screw up. And if they do screw up, the other ones have a chance to catch it. In media, you put it out there, it's out there. That's it.
Right.
Like, even if you're 100% wrong, it's still out there and people will believe it. Doesn't matter what the story is. Doesn't matter the content. It's out there.
This reminds me of, I believe, 3 months ago, President Trump tweeted a video of several doctors confirming, the efficaciousness of the malaria treating
hydrochloroquine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a mouthful, but that was complete. That was bogus, and the amount of people that immediately believed it and thought that coronavirus was going to magically be cured the next day was remarkable. That's the president of the United States.
The United States, it's like we're so free, but we're so trapped in our own minds. Like, we have so much freedom that's unchecked that we don't even know what to do with it.
Yeah, we're told that we're the freest nation on earth, but there's a quote that I'm very fond of. It is by I believe Montesquieu, maybe. Man is born free, but wherever he goes, he's in chains. And America, prides itself on its abundance of freedom and natural rights, but we are being enslaved by the agencies that we thought would liberate us and make our lives easier.
I know.
They're against us.
The internet, when it first came out, like the early 90s, it's wow, this is going to be great for society. 2020, holy crap, we're going down into the doomsday right now.
Yeah.
Like that's only
Yeah.
30 years. That's it. It's not that long at all.
Yeah. It's a remarkable trajectory.
It's
Um, it will reverse, but we don't
how?
know when. We don't know
How is
how.
it going to be
We
through
don't know
another civil war?
at what cost. We don't know. I mean, could be another civil war. I would hope not.
I would
But
hope not, but there's nothing suggesting anything else.
yeah,
Like there's no reconciliation of peace. There's no one coming to talk to the other side. There's no one even suggesting policy to limit the amount of to limit how social media can dictate our lives. Nothing. And
yeah.
there's not even much you can do.
It's like two tectonic plates.
Yeah,
The left maybe and the right, and in the middle there's a fault line. And eventually, there's got to be a rupture.
yeah. There,
Tension's got to be released.
there's
And
this guy I'm really fond of, Stefan. He died earlier this year in May. I'm blanking on his last name. He wrote a book. It's like bad times create strong men create good times
right,
create weak men.
yes, and then it's a cycle.
Yeah, we're getting to that time where it's so good, we're becoming so weak that we're inevitable for something catastrophic to happen to bring us back together. Like it
Yeah,
just happens like over and over again. Like 9/11, that the day after 9/11 was the most patriotic America has ever been as a unit. But it took 9/11 to get there.
exactly.
It's going to take something really big and something really really gory for America to be able to come to grips with itself.
Yeah.
It's,
And the coronavirus pandemic, is the challenge of a century, perhaps,
yeah.
on so many levels. But it has not created, strong men, which is ironic.
No,
It's
it
made,
has not because of the influence of social media. Like the Spanish flu, they didn't have this issue. It was the news was telling the news, and they could rally together. But now it's divided again. It's like a virus is supposed to bring us together. We're divided on what the virus is.
exactly. We don't even have a consensus on how it spreads. Should you even wear a mask is a political debate these days, which is pathetic. You
It's
know,
the most basics. The basics we can't even come to terms with.
it is public health 101. We can't even agree on it.
Nothing.
But
Literally
back then
not a single thing.
they didn't even have cell phones, and they didn't have rapid information like we do, and that led to a more centralized and monolithic, unopposed effort at disease prevention and control.
Yeah.
And nowadays that is just so impossible because of how multidimensional our just our societal landscape is.
Yeah.
We don't have
It's
any
like we're
ways.
living in our own tribes. Like every political landscape has a tribe, and we will not leave the tribe no matter what.
We've become tribal. We really have. You're either with us or you're not, and we fight about people.
And when tribes clash, they go to war. There's no just meeting another tribe and absorbing into a greater tribe. It's no, we have our own principles and values, and you have yours, and we think ours are better than yours, and we're gonna go to war.
Right. And I blame, identity politics for much of this.
Oh, for sure.
People are divided against each other through what people would otherwise claim as social constructs. Like
Yes.
they're constructing, these barriers between people that should, therefore, they think, determine political affiliation,
Yeah, it's
gender, sexual orientation,
crazy.
religion.
It's ridiculous that you can even assume something about someone just by looking at them. I'm going to assume everything that you believe just because I'm looking at you. It's
Yeah,
the antithesis of what a human is, like a complex creature. You're looking at them and assuming the most basic things about them, and that will dictate everything that they think.
exactly.
It's almost
Are limited by their stereotypes.
Yeah,
And it's sad. Very, very, very sad.
honestly, I think identity politics has gotten to a point where in the next couple of elections, it will either flip where people realize that identity politics is absurd and it will not last, or it will get to a point where there will be an overwhelming push for more of identity politics. Like in San Diego recently, you're now required. You're not required, but when you're applying for a job, they take into consideration your race, your gender, your sexual orientation for your job. Like imagine
Yeah.
like imagine spending your whole entire childhood just like dreaming of something, studying, doing, having the merit to do something, going out and working hard, and then oh, your sex isn't what we need, your race isn't what we need.
Right.
It's they're looking for tokens. Everyone is a token, and you just have to find where your token fits.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
It is indeed absurd.
Getting very, very, very close to something catastrophic happening in order to bring us together. And I don't think there's a way around that because people do not want to come together on their own.
No, and the divisions just keep getting worse. I mean, just when you think there's a new low, there's yet another new low.
Yeah, I know it's crazy. Like we thought before the pandemic, we were already at our opposite ends of everything. The pandemic happens, we're like, holy shit, that was nothing. That was nothing. We can't even agree on a mask. We cannot.
Yeah, and now our president, is going to refuse to, concede power. This has never happened ever in our country's history.
Well, I don't think yeah, but there's a lot of things about like this election that hasn't happened in our country's history, and some of them are valid, some of them are not. Like in Arizona, there was in Maricopa, Arizona, they determined 62% of the ballots, the population ballots, I think. There was the elected officials told the people to use Sharpies. Did you hear about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, they told them to use Sharpies, and the people who use Sharpies, they're looking into if their ballots were counted or not. And it specifically says if you use Sharpies, it will not be counted. The elected officials are telling you that. It's a little sketchy.
I heard some reports that, yes, some people did use Sharpies, but that their votes were counted. And that
Oh no, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the fact that the elected official is telling you the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Like that's.
I don't know if their votes were disqualified because of the Sharpie. I think there were cases in which they were supposed to be using Sharpies. But the point is that there's
corruption on both sides for their own specific agendas, and it is just a swamp. It's just a swamp.
Absolutely.
It's not going to get better with the new presidency. It's not. It's going to continue to get worse. And like the banking system is just going to continue to fund it. They're going to continue to put their own corrupt politicians in, and there's absolutely nothing a private citizen can do except to run against a corrupt politician who's being funded billions of dollars. Like we can't. We're outmatched.
Yeah, and this is a topic we can completely, we can analyze completely because there's just so much to talk about. But the point is that we don't realize how entrenched we are in in division and misinformation and bias, and how it affects every aspect of our lives. It affects things as simple as mask wearing. Should you listen to science or should you listen to your politicians?
But even the science, even you have doctors on both sides saying the exact opposite things. You have science.
No consensus either, which is unbelievable.
I know. Science is now a tool for politicians. Like that's absurd that science is now biased.
Yeah.
It's never been done. Well, I don't know about all of history, but still we're now getting into terms where in the next 20 years, I would not be surprised if they use math against each other. The same exact math. That's what we're doing. We're using the same science against other science.
It's true. And, you know, you think about global warming, whole nother discussion. And,
Yeah.
you know, these issues matter, and they're in urgent need of being addressed. And, you know, the sooner we, you know, act and do something on a united front, the better off we are, because, you know, time's running out in many regards.
Yeah, but it's the people who are doing something, they always have their own agendas that are never transparent, and we never know what's going on, and we never will know.
You won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Is that going to be it for today?
I wish we could go on for a couple more hours.
Yeah.
But
I will do this again. Here, I'll pause.